video games are like the best-selling books of the new generation, so it makes a lot of sense to bring it to the big screen.
Video games at this point are now making sometimes more money than the movies are.
This day and age with the technology, it's so advanced, is just mind-blowing.
It's pretty wild.
You're actually getting closer and closer to a thing that you haven't even seen yet.
If I can be a little bit blunt for a minute, the Hollywood types kind of screwed up the video game business for a while.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion.
The camp element to the films are something that are kind of charming in a strange way.
I mean, it's very hard, one, take a video game movie, two, say we want to do something very different. You have to take a shot.
It has a following and this movement that just keeps getting bigger.
It's interactive, you know?
The craft of film had to change, and ironically had to become more like the craft of video games.
Now, anytime you have a blockbuster, you have to have a game. You have to.
We weren't just tapping into the audience for a particular video game. I felt we were reinventing an entire genre of movies.
These forces, this is the heart of our entire operation.
They're merging together.
Anything's possible. I don't know what's coming.
It's gotten big time and it's growing.
It's exciting and it's dangerous and it's weird.
It's a great fusion.
This is Sparta!
In the spring of 2007, an unheralded action movie took the box office by storm. The film, 300, earned over $130 million in its first 10 days. The surprise blockbuster of the season was widely noted for its extreme violence and distinct visual style. The movie looked just like a video game.
Well, I think something interesting has happened in Hollywood, particularly in the last 2 years. Games imitating movies and now movies imitating games.
300 is essentially a video game brought to the screen.
You've got people in front of blue screens. All the backgrounds are computer generated.
It's taken a long time, decades, for Hollywood to start to deal with film that way. And I think at this point, Hollywood is trying to make the leap into video games.
Filmmaking isn't what it used to be. I think we're advancing consistently into new scary territory.
Filmmakers do perceive video games as cutting edge. Some of the more prolific filmmakers are definitely looking into that area.
But 300 is only the latest example of a relationship that has been evolving for over 3 decades. A spectacle from simple roots. The story of Hollywood's gaming relationship goes back to the world's first mass-market game, Pong.
Remember the Pong console? It was just like this big box with the 2 dials on it, and it was like tennis. I don't know if you remember the beep, beep, beep.
Yeah, it hits the thing and you have to move the thing and... Yeah, I know that game.
You controlled the 2 paddles that went up and down the screen like that, and there was a square ball that bounced in between it, and it made this pong noise.
It's simple. It's like the essence of a video game.
As primitive as you can get, and it was absolutely addictive and completely fascinating, and it was awesome.
Produced by an upstart California company called Atari, Pong let people control the world inside the screen, all for the price of a quarter.
Pong really jumped off the charts instantaneously. Our cash box was too small, and it completely jammed up full of quarters.
The arcade revolution started in the early 70s with the launch of Pong and the Atari brand.
The arcade was the big thing, right? It was a big thing to go to, big thing to hang out.
It was a completely new interactive experience, and it hooked everybody I knew.
Video games were becoming big business. Atari was the fastest growing company in the history of American industry.
Warner Communications came in and actually bought the Atari company from Nolan Bushnell for about $30 million.
That created a very strong link with the movie industry.
Initially, it was an adjunct of another form of entertainment, and once it became a revenue stream for them, then they get interested in it. But the studios really couldn't care about it unless they could use it to make more money.
Throughout the 70s and early 80s, the game industry continued to explode and evolve. Led by Atari, sales passed the $1 billion mark in 1981. Developers aggressively targeted the home entertainment market.
Atari days, gosh. Something about the ability to move the objects on this television that you always admired for being able to project pictures, that was so amazing to me. It's interactive, you know?
Before long, video games were all over the silver screen. Hackers and techies became leading men. And gamers were Hollywood heroes in their own right. Video games were also helping to push the process of filmmaking into a new frontier, the dawning era of computer-generated imagery. The film that had first paved the way offered a stunning blend of live action and animation. Disney's 1982 cult classic, Tron.
Within the studio, there was a faction of the old guard that just couldn't believe we were doing this movie, that we were going to do computer animation and that we were going to get into video games instead of fairy tales.
I play video games better than anybody.
Disney said, well, how do you know any of this is going to work? And how do we know you're not insane?
The star of the movie was a game designer, played by a 33-year-old Jeff Bridges.
Tron was a movie about a man who makes games, who is attacked and actually ported inside a computer and actually does battle within a computer's hardware, and the world around him is computer graphics.
Oh, great.
The hero is a video game designer. And we're sitting there going, yeah, we're video game designers, we're pretty cool.
Just the actual special effects of Tron was really ahead of its time.
Tron, when I look back on it, was very, very important for the whole industry because it was not just a movie with a video game in it. It was a video game. It was a visual video game experience put on the screen.
Tron grossed some $33 million at the box office, nearly double its production budget. But the film wasn't appreciated by Hollywood at large.
Tron wasn't even nominated for a Special Effects Academy Award, which is pretty amazing in retrospect. And the talk at the Academy was we cheated when we used computers. There was a real feeling amongst the establishment that computers were the Antichrist. And there was a feeling amongst young people like, yeah, they are. Only they're my Antichrist.
And since young people were the ones pumping quarters into arcade machines, Tron made its way to the game room and broke ground in another way.
Mattel ended up buying the license to Tron. So we went on this mad rush trying to do Tron games. So this is the first example, really, of that sort of synergy between Hollywood and games.
The sort of synergy Tron first exploited is now standard practice for big-budget Hollywood properties.
That was spectacular!
Surf's Up, Sony's animated summer blockbuster, epitomizes the marketing model. The star-studded cast includes Jeff Bridges,
Geek!
Okay.
and John Hader,
Well, then go talk to her.
with Shia LaBeouf providing the voice of Cody Maverick, the movie's main character.
Come on, go for it. She's digging on you.
Not gonna go for it, Joe.
The studio's plan banks on the idea that moviegoers would first fall in love with LaBeouf's character on the big screen, then ride the wave home in a video game spin-off.
Yeah, baby!
It's a great extension opportunity. In animation, to some extent, the conversion from movie to game is a little bit purer because it's a digital character to begin with. So if you're Cody Maverick, our hero in the movie, and you're Cody Maverick, the surfer in the game, the model matches up a little bit more closely.
Now, anytime you have a blockbuster, it is status quo. You have to have a game. You have to. It's just, that's the way it is.
Take these characters that we've created, or our writers have created, our directors have created, our actors have created, and then you transfer them to another medium. It's another way to engage an audience in looking at our films.
What is common today was novel back in the 80s.
Basically, in the early 80s, you had this huge influx of Hollywood studios coming in and video game companies wanting to try to capitalize on the success of pretty much any film was out there.
So everybody's looking around, where's my next hit? What's something a consumer will recognize? They'll look at the box and they'll know they want it. Movies sounded like that thing.
There was properties being licensed as random as Mr. T's The A-Team, Smokey and the Bandit.
Halloween, The Fly.
Kramer versus Kramer. This is a height of absurdity that there was a bidding war for this license.
If I can be a little bit blunt for a minute, the Hollywood types kind of screwed up the video game business for a while. They didn't really understand that this was a somewhat different medium.
That was never clearer than during the summer of 1982. Steven Spielberg's E.T. was on its way to becoming the biggest box office smash of all time. The E.T. game would be designed by Howard Scott Warshaw. The Atari programmer had just spent the better part of a year finishing a game version of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And in late July, Atari and Warner Brothers signed off on the most ambitious licensing deal in history.
Warner Communications, obviously being a Hollywood studio, decided to try to cash in on that by offering Spielberg an unprecedented $25 million.
There was one major catch. The E.T. game had to be ready in just 5 weeks in order to be in stores in time for Christmas.
No one had really ever done a game in less than 6 months. And I'm thinking, I got 5 weeks to do a game for the biggest movie that's ever been done.
He should have said, no, there's no way. 5 weeks just doesn't work.
But Warshaw didn't blink. And before the ink on the contract was even dry, he was whisked by private jet from Silicon Valley to a meeting with Warner Brothers executives in Burbank. Spielberg was there as well.
And I saw the game plan, a very rough scheme of the game, and I was amazed at how difficult it was.
I came at this wanting to do something fresh and new because I'm an aggressive designer. You know, I don't want it's going to be a big game. It needs to have some kind of hook. I lay out this whole design of how it's going to go, and it all looks good. And Spielberg looks at me and he goes, "Couldn't you do something like Pac-Man?" And I just I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow. At first I thought, well, gee, you know, couldn't you have done something like The Day the Earth Stood Still?
E.T. for the Atari 2600 was one of the most hotly anticipated game adaptations of a movie ever made.
They expected to sell huge numbers of the game just because it was the E.T. game.
The game industry has a long history of feeling defensive about what it does, that it's a second-class citizen to film. And I think there was a lot of excitement in the industry that a movie backed by somebody as powerful as Steven Spielberg was coming into their space and was going to sort of both do good things for the film industry and legitimize the video game industry as well. And of course it did neither.
I remember the anticipation for the game, and I just remember being so disappointed when I played it. I just thought it was terrible.
You're this brown blob running around collecting Reese's Pieces and pieces of your spaceship and falling in holes. It didn't work.
E.T. is constantly listed up there in the top 10 worst video games of all time. It was such a textbook case of how to do everything wrong.
E.T. did sell over 1 million cartridges, but so many were returned that Atari took a massive hit.
They built so many of them and sold so few of them that they took them into a New Mexico landfill.
Atari trucked big truckloads of them out to the desert and buried them.
Some said they even put a layer of concrete over the top.
You could say that E.T. is the poster child for everything that was wrong with that era. It hit just as the market was starting to crest, and so they became the most famous of a series of disasters that populated that time in history.
Atari's disaster, however, was the most dramatic. In 1983, the company posted a loss of more than $538 million.
Atari was the fastest growing company in the history of the United States, and then they became the fastest falling company in the history of the United States.
The video game boom was immediately followed by the video game crash.
And if games weren't selling, Hollywood wasn't buying.
Capture. And action.
Given the historic missteps early on, the sight of major Hollywood talent working in video games today is somewhat surprising. But actors like The Rock now routinely appear in video games, creating a new level of gamer experience.
This is what's great about being part of a video game is there's a lot of room and a lot of latitude for creativity, from everything from the moves that the character does, how he walks, how he talks, how he breathes, how he responds, how he reacts to different things, just like you would obviously when you create a character in a movie.
Under threat from Gomez, he'd have killed her if she resisted. She was inside with a reason, just waiting to make her move.
I think when you're able to bring that to life in a video game, in the form of a video game, it makes it that much more special.
Good. Yeah, if you can hold him around the neck, you just hold him out like you got him. Yeah. Just kind of hold.
Well, I think the appeal for actors crossing over into video games is that they're getting so much better. You know, the technology is just advancing because it's so realistic and everything's there.
Video games just feed a different appetite. It's just a money game, and video games at this point are now making sometimes more money than the movies are.
But video games were hardly making any money back in 1983, and collaboration with Hollywood was virtually non-existent.
Once the game industry crashed, a lot of people thought, well, that's the end.
Hollywood quickly lost interest. I mean, Tron and that whole movement reached as far as it could reach.
Suddenly, the video game market is collapsing, it's falling apart, and then it's just nobody really wanted anything to do with it.
There was, however, one exception. A veteran Disney animator who in the early 80s used skills honed in Hollywood to create a unique arcade game.
At the time, Gary Goldman and myself just finished making a movie called The Secret of NIMH. NIMH didn't do very well at the box office, so we were wondering how we were going to fund the next picture. And there was a fellow that came to our doorstep who had an idea to make a video game unlike anything in the arcade.
Dragon's Lair, the fantasy adventure where you become a valiant knight on a quest to rescue the fair princess from the clutches of an evil dragon.
The game had a classic Hollywood storyline. The technology, however, was new. Dragon's Lair used a laserdisc, which allowed players to interact with movie-quality images.
Dragon's Lair was revolutionary because it didn't look like any other game that was coming out. It looked fluid. It looked like the kind of experience that you could have gone to the movies for.
As I got in, I began to see the possibilities of this character, Dirk. We could actually turn him around, and we could actually get him to do things with his facial expressions, with his voice.
This was one of the first real attempts to combine the two media and create that sense of interactivity into the story.
Despite the enormous success of Dragon's Lair, Bluth's migration to the video game world did not inspire a series of imitators from Hollywood. The video game business, at least in the United States, was still reeling. In Japan, however, it was thriving.
The Japanese, I think, relate to the whole video game culture differently than we do because they believe in the spirit of things.
They were a generation ahead in technology, and they built some good games.
And the man who would propel Japanese games into American homes was a quixotic, legendary figure in the gaming world, Shigeru Miyamoto.
Shigeru Miyamoto is definitely one of the most interesting people in the video game industry. He was a puppeteer, he was a painter, he was a toy maker, he had, long hair, he was sort of a bohemian type, and he ended up working at the Nintendo company.
When I started working on video games, I realized that it was a very good medium for doing those types of creative activities.
Miyamoto comes in, and his idea was, why can't games borrow from film? Why can't games borrow from literature?
In order to help people understand my game better, I thought I would try to apply a little bit of a story to it.
Now you're playing with power.
By the mid-'80s, Miyamoto's innovations reignited gaming in the U.S.
Nintendo was a very smart company, and they brought a lot of innovation to the marketplace.
Nintendo figured out how to really market it
for casual to non-casual gamers for the home.
These were video games that were about characters that were made for video games.
When Nintendo came out, no one had ever seen graphics like that before. So that was huge.
More like baseball and excite bike.
It was character, it was marketing, it was being able to push it across to a whole unique genre of people that might not have gone out to the arcades and played.
And the character that took them furthest was a fat little plumber from Brooklyn.
If you look at E.T. as the game that killed the industry, you can look at Super Mario Brothers as the game that brought it back to life.
Mario started out brilliantly in Donkey Kong, the coin-operated game.
Mario was the, he was the Italian plumber. He was the guy, out to get the princess or, the girl in the Donkey Kong game.
When we released Donkey Kong, the character was originally just called Jumpman. But the landlord of the warehouse that Nintendo of America was using, whose name happened to be Mario, I thought, that's actually that's a catchy name.
Mario, it was one of those, it was just such a cute character. Everything was very colorful, really great sound effects, great music.
Mario was able to capture the imagination because there was a story around it and character development, and there was a character, and it worked.
The phenomena that Mario became once he was released is really almost incalculable. Studies were showing that more American school children recognized Mario than they did Mickey Mouse.
Super Mario was so popular that in 1991, Nintendo made over $1.2 billion, which made it even bigger than Toyota.
Of course, Mario's undeniable success meant it was only a matter of time before light bulbs went off in Hollywood.
Disney saw that Mario had been this big success, so they decided, let's turn it into a big budget feature and get all those people to play the video game to go see it.
Again, we'll grab a story from anywhere, and if it's from a video game, if we feel it's interesting, we feel we can entertain an audience, we'll take it.
The directors chosen for the task were a husband and wife duo who had created the bizarre 80s icon, Max Headroom.
I read the script, and the script's horrible. I hated it.
I have to admit, I had to go out and get the game and put it on and get into it.
Everybody I spoke to about it, the idea of turning a video game into a movie was such a banal, bad, pathetic idea, and it could never really work. But the challenge was enormous.
Look down there! Luigi!
The kind of heart of the film was a brother that was losing his brother, and he wanted him back. It's a sort of a love story, really, but a love story between two brothers. That's what we tried to make it about. We kind of got lost along the way with all the special effects and everything, unfortunately.
With a cast that included Bob Hoskins, John Leguizamo, and Dennis Hopper, production began in March of 1992.
It was very tough filmmaking. I think it was one of the biggest sets ever built. The exterior of New York City, built inside a cement factory. It was the dinosaur version of New York.
I got a feeling we're not in Brooklyn no more.
Where you going? Hey.
Well, it was complicated. We had everything, we had computer graphics and animatronics and visual effects and, gargantuan props.
Nintendo had some kind of penalty if the film didn't get finished by Christmas, I think it was. So there was a rush to get it finished.
The Super Mario Brothers movie was shot in just over 40 days, and by the winter of 1992, it was set to premiere.
Oh, the expectations were just enormous. I mean, just everybody thought that it was going to be a mega hit.
But the film fell flat.
Mario is a great game and a phenomenal property. Look at it, it's still successful today. I love the Mario property. The movie didn't work.
It only ended up opening with the $8 million weekend.
Unfortunately, Jurassic Park came out the same week. So that didn't help.
Artistically, it was not successful.
The gamers were very vocal about what a bad movie it was.
It was just so incredibly weird that audiences really couldn't understand it.
It just was the beginning and end of a Hollywood franchise.
I was hoping that it was going to catch on more than it did, obviously.
I'm actually proud of the film. It was like panned by the critics, and they thought it was an insult to the audience's intelligence or something, you know. But it was supposed to be fun.
Despite the flop, the genie was out of the bottle. For the next several years, Hollywood would continue to look to the biggest video games of the day for inspiration.
Hollywood is the Me Too mentality, so people see Disney coming out with the Super Mario Bros. Movie, let's go out and let's make our movie.
You were hearing, as a gaming fan, that every major franchise that you heard about was being optioned to be made into a feature film.
And in the early 90s, that meant one thing.
Fighting games, games in which you put in a quarter and another player puts in a quarter and you beat each other up.
I like the different characters that you could choose, and they each had their own strengths and weaknesses.
I just liked the fighting aspect, the combat aspect of it. You know, you would go and, you know, one of your buddies and you try to kick your friend's ass.
Fighting games first appeared in the late 80s, and by the 90s had reached the apex of their popularity. The holy trinity of fight games at the time were Street Fighter, Double Dragon, and of course, Mortal Kombat.
I played Mortal Kombat. I don't know if I was very good at it.
If you looked at the figures in a Mortal Kombat game, you're like, well, that looks like a real person, practically.
Had sprays of two-dimensional blood, and you could see spinal columns being ripped out.
For the time, it was a huge newsmaker due to the violence, and parents had an absolute fit.
These ultra-violent games were as controversial as they were lucrative. That made them a natural choice for source material.
Fighting games and action games do map quite well to blockbusters from the Hollywood perspective.
You don't have to do, mass translations to a karate kick, or a hi-ya.
Let's face it, violence in cinema has been around since the beginning of cinema.
Kids that had grown up with Atari, this is what they kind of wanted to see.
Double Dragon and Street Fighter were the first to get the Hollywood treatment. But in the end, they had familiar results.
Double Dragon was one of those flash-in-the-pan movies that came out, it only made $2 million, and it was one of those movies that if you were asleep that day, you missed it.
The Street Fighter adaptation was more successful, but it failed to score big at the box office. In fact, today it is more likely to be remembered as a historical footnote than as an innovative movie.
Street Fighter is heartbreaking to a lot of film lovers because it was Raul Julia's last film before he died. It's a shame that Street Fighter was so kind of silly. It just didn't translate well to screen. It was just poorly done.
That was a common refrain among moviegoers.
When you adapt a movie from one media to another, you have to be really careful, and you have to almost take the source medium and go back and say, I'm just interested in the story.
In the movie, you can show pivotal moments, you can have reveals, with sound, you can really control the experience, but it's a very one-way experience.
If a game is successful and it's a great video game, doesn't mean it's going to make a good movie. It just doesn't.
A film needs a great story. It needs great characters that have great relationships. It needs great dialogue. It needs great performance. It needs great directing. It may need great visual effects. I don't think that there's any correlation between good game and good film.
It's a completely different kind of storytelling. In films, I think the best films to me have a simple plot and complex characters. Whereas in games, it's the opposite. It's about, okay, we're going to go here, there, do this, do that.
In the game, you have to find ways to tell the same story interactively.
You have to separate in video games the playability factor from the story. And I think that's where the confusion lies.
Critics and gamers alike draw a direct line from these early video game flops to a director working prominently in game-based movies today, Uwe Boll.
You're in the air, dead already, dying, and then it's a cut. I think that video games are like the best-selling books of the new generation, so it makes a lot of sense to acquire that properties and bring it to the big screen. Okay, let's go again. We go tighter, and then we're picking up the blood effect.
D-Mark.
Uwe's been great. He has a very different way of filming.
So you come around here, Michelle. So you're here.
Oh gosh, he's such a technical guy. It's interesting, because he's the kind of guy that has the whole entire movie already in his head.
you go down and try to help him out or whatever, yeah? On one hand, the studios are still producing really old-fashioned stuff, and on the other hand, if they are on a panel, they're always saying like, absolutely, video games is so important, influencing the film industry, blah, blah, blah. But in the real world, it didn't happen.
Keep those weapons moving, display!
To date, Boll has released 3 video game adaptations and has an additional 6 other movies either completed or in some form of production. He is nothing if not prolific.
This is a strategy to make one movie after the other and not like thinking 3 years about the movie.
It's this sort of thinking that has led many to dub Boll the modern-day Ed Wood.
And he steps it. Yeah?
There is also the matter of critical reaction to his work.
Uwe Boll's films are so kind of schlocky, really like B movies, and campy, which the camp element to the films are something that are kind of charming in a strange way. But gamers will think they're bad for the video game genre because they aren't taken seriously, and I think they're often poorly done. Sorry, Uwe Boll.
Boll does not take such criticism lying down. Recently, he challenged his critics to face him in a boxing ring. Boll, a former amateur fighter, had much better results boxing than at the box office.
So this was the whole thing where I said, like, I want to fight the critics. Like, you fuckers writing about my movies constantly lies about how I finance the movies, how the movies are, whatever. I'm a very critical film looker also. I go and look every movie. And if people tell me they think Elektra is better as Blood Rain or Catwoman, they are retards. They have no idea.
Love him or hate him, Boll remains a polarizing figure. But he's certainly not the only director who's come to represent video game movies.
Paul W.S. Anderson really leads all other directors in the genre.
That's great. That looks like it's really there.
People feel that he genuinely understands games and is really trying and has been more successful than a lot of other directors in terms of bringing out whatever that magic, elusive fun is about games into the films.
The understanding that Paul has was that you can't simply carbon copy the game. You have to understand the theme and philosophy of the game.
Paul W.S. Anderson, who actually was a gamer, was someone who actually understood the video game world, who grew up playing video games, and who had that kind of reverence to the material.
It's like when you adapt anything. If you adapt a book and you take too many liberties with the book, you take a risk that the audience are just not going to come. It doesn't matter how many copies of Gone with the Wind has been sold. If your idea as a filmmaker is to set it on Mars in the far future, you're probably going to lose the original audience for the book. And it's just the same with video games.
While Anderson is widely recognized today, in the early 90s, he was just another young director looking for a break. That opportunity would come with Mortal Kombat.
I wanted to make Mortal Kombat because it's something I always wanted to do, which is kind of Star Wars meets Enter the Dragon.
Hollywood had kind of written off the idea of making movies out of video games. But I was really convinced, and even my agent was saying, "Are you sure you want to do this? A video game movie, they don't really work."
I mean, it's very hard to, one, take a video game movie, two, say we want to do something very different, and find someone who's very set in their ways. You have to take a shot.
The resulting film was the first of its kind, a video game adaptation that did well in the box office and didn't offend its legion of fans.
Finish him! Mortal Kombat was definitely a very successful movie. I mean, it was a #1 movie in America for 3 weeks, in Canada for 4 weeks. That's why I love Canadians.
I think it recreated authentically the tone of the game, and so gamers liked it.
The action scenes, the fights, the gory deaths and fatalities.
They executed that movie just how the game was. I think all the pieces just came together to make an interesting kung fu movie. Certainly it wasn't going to win an Oscar, but that was the first video game movie that I actually liked.
No one thought it was going to work. And you know what? It was actually great because everyone left us alone. I mean, we were just in Thailand making a movie. No one paid any attention to us. No one thought it was going to work. We could take all kinds of chances. It was wonderful.
There was a big audience for the game, but we told the right story, I think. And that delivered for the fans and also for the non-fans.
Flawless victory.
Although Mortal Kombat was a modest hit, Other financial clunkers of the time meant game properties didn't have a fighting chance. In fact, once again, video games were a dirty word in Hollywood.
Sudden jolt of rumble pack impact control sensor. Introducing Star Fox 64 with rumble pack. Only
Outside the movie industry, however, the success of Nintendo was a beacon.
Only for Nintendo 64.
Sony, Sega, Microsoft. In the 90s, some of the biggest names in tech and electronics got into the game business. Hardware wars drove innovation, and powerful new consoles took gaming into a new dimension.
What you see is the ability to create fully realized 3D worlds. And so you have more of a cinematic experience in the game.
When they went 3D, suddenly there was a camera and camera work involved. Now instead of watching Mario run past you, you were instead watching Mario run ahead of you. You were no longer a bystander, you were now in his head or behind his head.
And another part of the anatomy launched the next gaming revolution. In the fall of 1996, Lara Croft debuted in Tomb Raider, a game for the new Sony PlayStation, launching a series of wildly popular games that took both graphics and gamers to new heights.
It's like going up a set of stairs.
The makers of Tomb Raider clearly figured out that if you're going to have to look at somebody's backside, Lara Croft's backside might not be a bad backside to be looking at.
Very nice, Lara.
Tomb Raider was one of the first 3D third-person action-adventure games. And it was really exciting. It was the first game to use a woman, and it was a big risk.
Kill her!
You know, Lara with the big breasts. You know, it's just tight shorts. I mean, it's ridiculous.
She's basically the really hot female version of Indiana Jones.
I think it's kind of the fantasy because, you know, you got a hot girl and then, ooh, and then she can kick ass. And you got it in one package.
She actually has a forceful role. And so not only did she appeal to guys, but she also started appealing to women.
I think with Lara Croft, you had a new icon.
The game's developers wanted to bring Lara Croft to the silver screen, but studios were playing hard to get.
It wasn't appealing to Hollywood studios because we had a video game which had a stigma attached to it because of the failures of Mario Brothers and Street Fighter. And in terms of opening a movie, they didn't open movies with women.
The general kind of wisdom in Hollywood is that action movies are seen by guys. And guys like to see other guys up on screen. There was almost this rule. It was unwritten, but people would verbalize it, that female-led action movies don't work.
I mean, the market was absolutely dead. There was no market at all.
Video games had their first marketable starlet. Selling her was clearly another story. In time, the video game industry would overcome this problem by emulating Hollywood. Whereas Lara Croft's creators had trouble convincing mainstream producers that she was ready for her close-up, game developers would eventually learn that their properties simply needed a touch of showbiz. High-profile marketing efforts, hot celebrity endorsers, splashy red carpet premieres.
What's really changed is that how much Hollywood contributes to the marketing of the video game.
The video game makers are always talking about Hollywood. It's almost like a fixation.
It's about creating greater awareness for games. So the thing is that gamers are not rock stars. You know, we're just not.
The red carpet event for the Hollywood studio is an opportunity to get the press to cover our movie stars. People go see the movie because they like the star. I don't think that's the same in the video game business.
Problem is, in trying to make the video game industry like Hollywood, is that the stars of the video game industry are virtual characters. They are not real people.
That was truer than ever back when gaming's first starlet was ready for her close-up. Lara Croft, in fact, was the pioneer in gaming's journey into Hollywood-style marketing.
Our marketing department was the first marketing that broke games out of the game ghetto.
Pioneering fashion, Lara Croft's creators launched an old-fashioned blitz of media and merchandising. The campaign had an innovative twist. Lara Croft, packaged and sold as a real-life celebrity.
We actually marketed the property to Hollywood to raise the profile and raise interest to the point where the film community would be comfortable making an investment in the Tomb Raider property as a movie.
The campaign sparked a bidding war in Hollywood, and the star search went from Anderson to Zeta Jones. Ultimately, in the summer of 2001, an Academy Award winner brought gaming's leading lady to life.
You know, the Laura Croft thing, that was huge, and the movie wound up doing better than the game did, and then helped the game get bigger. It was just, it's nuts.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, it did amazing, the film.
If you tell a good story with talented people around, you're going to have a success, and I think they had a success with the film.
After a $47 million opening weekend, Tomb Raider would go on to take in more than $250 million worldwide.
I think they use the word boffo. The Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie did boffo business. It was a blockbuster, and a sequel was greenlighted almost instantly.
It was a massive success. Lara Croft paved the way for turning it into a more of an adult type of movie.
The Tomb Raider movie is the first video game-based movie that I can remember even getting a positive review.
Lara Croft is a phenomenon. She symbolized the powerful and the seductive quality of video games themselves, which was that this technology is going to seduce you, it's going to blow you away, and you're going to love it.
As to whether or not it's a good movie, that's up for debate, but it definitely started making the female role within video gaming and video game movies a lot more important.
It's no surprise to me that a woman can be tough, but that was not my intention in doing this, to prove that a woman could do it. It was actually, you know, I just never thought we couldn't.
Hot on the heels of this hit, another female star launched a game movie franchise, Resident Evil.
Just thought if we just tipped up slightly, we'd be able to see the brain. But
with Mortal Kombat writer-director Paul W.S. Anderson at the helm, the film version of this successful horror action series solidified gaming's place in Hollywood by going in an unexpected direction.
I played the 3 Resident Evil games that existed at that time before I started kind of approaching the idea of doing the adaptation. I thought an interesting story would be the prequel, as it were, to the video game. A movie that told the story of what had happened that kind of led up to the events in the first video game.
It's the story before the story, so it kind of gives the director some room to play around and have some fun and kind of make his own birth, you know, to this video game that was never expressed before. And I think that's kind of cool, you know?
That, for me, gave me an interesting palette because I could use locations that were used in the first video game. I could use all of the visual iconography that were in the first 2 video games. Yet, I could use a fresh set of characters.
You got a problem?
How's that?
I think there was real artistry in that film. It's really underrated. It got pretty bad reviews when it came out, but I think it's the best of the genre.
Resident Evil is probably the single best, original game to become a movie, and to some extent, it's true to kind of the kicking zombie butt of the game.
Even with its new take on the game's original plot, the adaptation was widely hailed for its faithfulness to the game's original roots, which were in fact cinematic.
Resident Evil, was heavily influenced by the Romero zombie movies, or Lucio Fulci and all the European zombie movies. That was a real genre.
The experience of playing the Resident Evil games was like the experience of watching these popular old zombie movies. It's very scary, it's very creepy and atmospheric. There's an emphasis on using what games were now able to do with lighting, with framing and shot composition to give you the chills that you get from a classic zombie movie.
Horror stories, fantasy stories, the weird and the wonderful really have a place in games.
No one had made one of those movies for 15 years. We weren't just tapping into the audience for a particular video game. I felt we were reinventing an entire genre of movies that just hadn't been done for a long time.
Action!
Resident Evil, which grossed over $100 million and spawned a pair of sequels, proved that games and movies had found common ground artistically. And in the new millennium, Hollywood's influence over games was more apparent than ever.
I think there's been a series of steps. I'd say the largest step in my mind from an impact of Hollywood on the games business would have to be Saving Private Ryan. Basically, Saving Private Ryan gave birth to a genre of gameplay. It isn't Saving Private Ryan the game, it's World War II infantry soldier role-playing action experience. That's, in my mind, been the first time where you've seen a great Hollywood experience translated into a mass game experience.
The Matrix franchise took the movie gaming experience even further. The trilogy used unique video game content produced side by side with the movie to expand the narrative's world, bridging storylines between the original and its sequels.
The directors of Matrix thought a video game shouldn't just be like a bland adaptation of the movie. It shouldn't just be you playing the same key moments as what's in the movie. We thought there was a lot of unexplored ground.
Before, mostly it was looked at as being something where it's a merchandising opportunity. So now they're far more aware of the needs for a game, and in fact they treat it more as a tool not only for just marketing the film as well, but just something that clearly is going to bring their story, their vision, their film, their product to a far wider audience.
I think most studios would aspire to do that with all their properties. It's just hard.
What do you think will happen after that? I don't know, but I got a feeling it's going to be one hell of a ride.
It was this positive vibration that sort of swept through the industry, and everybody just sort of, these two mediums got a little bit closer together because of The Matrix.
While The Matrix follow-ups were slow to catch on both financially and critically, the franchise did solidify the new model for 21st century showbiz. Movies and games working hand in hand.
There's definitely, I think, an increasing trend where people are making games that are based upon the films.
You have a market phenomenon that goes with the movie. There's certainly games to be sold on the back of movies.
There are literally thousands of games on the shelf, and so you tend to, license things so you can differentiate yourself.
No company embraced this notion more than Electronic Arts, the gaming world giant founded in 1982.
In founding the company, I brought into it a lot of Hollywood-type thinking. I had introduced the organizational structure of Hollywood with titles like producer and director. I was very much thinking that the area around Silicon Valley could become a new Hollywood.
The heritage of our company is sometimes clouded by the sort of success of our sports business, but we've been trying to kind of build entertainment software, for a very, very long time.
In doing so, the company went back to the future, utilizing the same licensing model that almost sunk the game industry back in the 80s.
Electronic Arts has built its business around licenses. They own the Madden NFL license, and that generates an enormous amount of revenue for them. They'll also license Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter.
Electronic Arts was really one of the first companies to go out there and realize the full potential of these big movie franchises.
Video games based on movies have always kind of had a tough niche to fill, because on the one hand, there's a built-in expectation of success, and a lot of times you don't get, the final assets until further along in the process.
I think a breakthrough moment for us was the Lord of the Rings series, because it was really the first time that we had the level of access that, that we had sort of dreamt of.
EA was getting that original data and then simplifying it to put in the game. So the people at EA were looking at this data coming in and going, how the hell did we ever get the rights for this?
Well, if you think about the Lord of the Rings, it was really that more than anything else that made us say, hey, wait a second, there's so much opportunity for us to take a very rich universe like the universe that Tolkien had created and deliver lots of different entertainment experiences within it. Experiences that they couldn't just get through film.
Now all of a sudden they were spending a decent amount of money, or at least as much money as they would on an original game, for this Hollywood licensed game, and that made a huge jump in the quality of what you were seeing.
Of course, other game companies were paying attention to EA. And it wasn't long before every major Hollywood franchise was being licensed.
Of course, Hollywood comes out with a few hundred new movies every year, but it really turns out that only about half a dozen film properties translate really well to video games.
And so you're even starting to see game companies in Hollywood dip further into the past, bringing up movies like Scarface or The Godfather.
Tony?
I want Sosa's head on a fucking platter, man.
I love the idea of a Scarface game, because there's a lot of younger people that weren't even born when that movie came out, but now they get to play Tony Montana.
Don't make me do this.
Larry, stop pointing that fucking gun at my dad!
I think there's certain movies that lend themselves to it. It's just, all it is continuation of that experience. And I think if you do it right, I think it's fantastic.
You have this incredible catalog of properties, and it really becomes much more of an opportunity for the studio to continue to keep its brands relevant.
Of course, not everyone is happy about this latest trend. In 2005, EA released a game version of the classic Godfather. And although several of the film's original stars cooperated on the game, it was condemned by the film's legendary director.
Francis Ford Coppola was not involved artistically or financially with the Godfather game, and he wasn't happy about it.
He's like, look, I created this film off of this novel, and it's really about the trappings and the negative aspects of living a violent life. Now that's been reinterpreted into a branded game, glamorizing that violence. This is the complete polar message of what that film was about, and I want nothing to do with this.
But I don't necessarily blame him for that. He created an unbelievably, incredibly well-crafted world, and that's that.
I wouldn't play The Godfather. To me, that would demean, and no disrespect to the people who are doing the game. I mean, more power to them. But I love The Godfather as a cinematic experience, and it would not be one that I would want to enter in as a game.
If you try to stay true to the original intent of the writer and the director, you have to be very sensitive. It shouldn't just be a means to make a buck. You have to be faithful to the property, or people are going to get mad.
Look, everybody's entitled to their opinion about, whether or not things in this medium are valid, and I could imagine that it's really difficult for, somebody who hasn't grown up in the business to appreciate what the medium has to offer. I just think that that's just generational.
I now invite you to be reborn.
Coppola may have had issues with EA's Godfather, but in gaming, other filmmakers have found an offer they can't refuse. George Lucas released the last of his Star Wars movies in 2005, but his galaxy lives on in a variety of popular games from LucasArts. Most of other Hollywood heavyweights have joined the fray and established creative partnerships with game developers.
Really, if you really look at that, that really says a lot. It really shows the direction that video game and the industry is taking.
We're a big and meaningful business. They respect games as an entertainment medium in the same way, and in the same class as film or television or music or literature.
It's all about blurring the lines even more. There's so much interest from both communities in working with each other.
The reason we're seeing a bunch of filmmakers move into the gaming business is because they would like another venue for their ideas. It's certainly one of the reasons why I'm here.
To horror master Clive Barker, a painter, writer, and the filmmaker behind the iconic Hellraiser, gaming offers a more intimate way to connect with his audience.
I love cinema, I love movies, but the kind of life that theater had is not there. There's no interaction. In a game, hey, the interaction comes back.
We've come for the firstborn.
Of course you have. Barker has made 2 horror action games, the most recent of which is an apocalyptic first-person shooter called Jericho.
I can still have my fantasies, I can still have all of the wild visionary stuff which appears in a movie, and we're connecting with the audience. The audience is not remote from us.
Director John Woo may have pushed the envelope the furthest. He's the first filmmaker to create a sequel to his own movie, produced straight to video game.
Then he pulled out another gun from his ankle, and then.
Well, the game is a fantasy world, just for fun, It means all the player, can be the director, you know. It can be the great director.
Stranglehold follows Wu's prized 1992 thriller Hard Boiled. Gamers play the starring role of Tequila, the tough cop originated by Chow Yun-fat.
I've been trying to develop a sequel for Hard Boiled, but I didn't know how. I didn't know how to make it better, you know. So I think the game will do it for me.
I think it looks much better than what I had imagined.
But it's not just directors working in another medium. And it's not just actors lending their voices to digital characters.
To put a bullet in one of our own? No way I'm doing that.
Games have emerged as an outlet for a wide spectrum of Hollywood craftsmen. Whether the tools of their trade involve props for intricate sound effects, computers for weaving new tales and rendering new worlds, or musical instruments to score video game soundtracks. And on the flip side, game developers are now producing live-action movies within their games.
These forces, this is the heart of our entire operation.
In fact, although Hollywood remains king of the hill, for the past several years, total sales of video game hardware and software have been on par with overall box office numbers. Both industries are multi-billion-dollar facets of mainstream entertainment. Studios not only accept gaming, but have embraced it. More and more, the differences between these two industries seem to be melting away. Convergence is the catchword of the day.
Now you can make a movie that looks like a video game and a video game that looks like a movie, and the idea is you can really take people into a different world.
All interconnected, and yet nobody, I think, wants to lose their identity within it. It's very love-hate, and it's interesting to see where it's going to head up.
She'll give you all the details of the mission.
I think if anything, it's just going to keep growing. Like the success of one can just boost the success of another.
It's fun to watch the evolution of what games become, and now that movies are becoming games and games are becoming movies, it's a great fusion.
But does that mean games will replace movies?
That's the billion-dollar question right there.
I'll never say never about anything, but I think people like to sit in a dark room and watch a movie.
It's like movies didn't destroy books. Television didn't destroy movies. And I think in the same way, you know, games are not going to kind of hurt the movies business.
It makes it incredibly pretentious when our industry keeps saying that we're going to deliver the future movie experience, because we're not.
Our industry is still kind of pre-Citizen Kane, you know, in that we haven't decoded the narrative of our medium yet.
We're right on the cusp of having that generation that has grown up always having games. And I think that they will make games that are more interesting, and they will make films that are more interesting. And that's when we'll start to see things break out.
I think it's just going to be a third experience that's going to result as this convergence that everyone's been talking about that, you know, in my opinion, has already happened.
Games, filmmaking, the reality and the hyper-reality of digital filmmaking are all complementing each other.
I've always said, if you want a really, really good dog, get a mutt, don't get a thoroughbred.
With movies and video games, sky's the limit. And we got it.